we've got some live pictures for you now. In a short while, we're expecting an announcement from Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party leader, and also the Conservative Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. In fact, here's Kemi Badenoch now about to make that speech. Let's go over live.
Tomorrow, immigration figures will be released that should show a drop in net migration. This is because of the changes we made in the last year of the Conservative government. The figures we saw for 2023 were astonishing. They highlighted a big problem we must be honest about. Even if we see a decline in tomorrow's data, the fact is immigration, both legal and illegal, is too high. Migration affects all of our lives in different ways. It certainly affected mine, and that is why I am happy to speak about it without fear. I believe our country is a beacon of light that shines all over the world, a place of security, opportunity, and prosperity, where people are treated equally. Millions want to come here, but we as politicians have to do right by the citizens of this country before anyone else. Our country cannot sustain the numbers we have seen. We are reducing the quality of life for people already here because immigration is at a pace too fast to maintain public services, and at a rate where it is next to impossible to integrate those from radically different cultures. It is time to tell the truth. For decades, the entire political class in this country has presided over mass migration. Since 1994, every year has seen more people arrive in this country than leave. Numbers climbed and climbed. During the last Conservative administration, we promised to bring numbers down. We did not deliver that promise. We ended free movement, but the system that replaced it is not working. Some of the increase in migration was for humanitarian reasons that few would disagree with, taking in refugees from Ukraine and British overseas nationals from Hong Kong. But that was not the whole story. We may have tried to control numbers, but overall, we did not deliver. Under my leadership, we are learning from our mistakes, and it is time for a new approach. We need to change. Let's break it down. First, if immigration is too quick, there is no integration. The ties that bind us start to fray. It doesn't matter whether you're massively for immigration or massively against it. Without a shared national identity, our country will suffer. When people come here, they must buy into the values, customs, and institutions that attracted them here in the first place. Second, the political class cannot pretend that immigration comes only with benefits and no costs. When we can all see the pressure on housing, roads, GPs, and wages, we must be honest. The failure of politics over the last 30 years has been to gloss over it or make it a fringe issue. That has to stop. Third, we can no longer be naive. It's nonsense that we have allowed a situation where judges deem safe countries to be unsafe, where loopholes are willfully exploited by opportunists, where the latest legal ruses and wheezes are sent around the world on social media. Now, as I have said, tomorrow's figures will likely show a reduction in net immigration. And no doubt the new government will try to take credit for that reduction, but that change is due to the reforms that the Conservatives made in our final months in power. For example, over the last 18 months, income thresholds for work visas increased by 50%. Restrictions were placed on care workers and students bringing family members into the country. Labour may criticise our record on immigration, but remember, throughout the last 14 years, the Labour Party were urging us to relax controls on immigration. Even though those figures tomorrow are likely to be a start in the right direction, it's not enough. We remain a world away from where we need to be. Labour won't get us there. Under a Labour government, immigration will remain far too high. We are already seeing the signs. For example, the last Conservative government committed to increasing the income threshold which a family must earn to bring relatives to the UK. This reform alone was estimated to cut net migration dramatically. but the Labour government have suspended that change. The Home Secretary wants a returns agreement with the EU, but that's the exact kind of agreement that saw us take more asylum seekers than were returned to the continent. So Labour won't change anything. The Prime Minister himself once said that there is a racist undercurrent which permeates all immigration law. And of course, he and his cabinet fought against the end of free movement. They scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it had even started. And we are already seeing the inevitable result as more and more people cross the channel, with significantly more arriving than last year. Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. As the former head of the Border Force has pointed out, enforcement on its own will never solve the problem. People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account. Our government's primary responsibility must be to its own citizens. Yes, economists sometimes argue that immigration can increase a country's wealth, but they are not thinking about the effect on individual people. In government, there's little detailed analysis about the impact of different types of immigration on living standards or on wage levels. There's even less analysis on the pressure on public services or housing or the welfare system as a result of mass migration. Sometimes there's even a squeamishness about discussing the negative aspects of immigration. This is not just a question of money, it's a question of fairness. And perhaps most importantly, most British citizens don't want to change what's good about our country. Even those who have recently arrived don't want to change these things. They came here because of what our country is, a secure and free society. Most people want to preserve that. So we need a new approach. We will not accept the claim that we can only deliver growth by accepting mass migration. We need a new approach which will mean that young people can build their lives in a country which does not have these pressures on housing and public services. And a new approach that starts by asking why government doesn't seem to be able to deliver that. The answer is because the system is broken. And until you accept that, any politician, all politicians are doomed to fail. We have to get the diagnosis right. So, we will review every policy, treaty and part of our legal framework, including the ECHR and the Human Rights Act. And in designing our detailed policies, we will put the following elements at the core. A strict numerical cap with visas only for those who will make a substantial and clear overall contribution. A fully transparent approach, publishing all the data so that for the first time, everyone can see the real costs and benefits of different types of migration. A reconsidered approach to citizenship and settlement, making the path to a British passport a privilege to be earned, not an automatic right. Zero tolerance for foreign criminals remaining in the UK. And, of course, an effective deterrent for illegal migration. Overall, our plans will look at all immigration routes, family, study, asylum and work, and at all ways people can enter the UK. We will look at the access of migrants and any dependents to welfare and public services. And we will need to improve the data and economic modelling that decision makers rely on. But I want to end on something very simple. We can argue about the effects of migration on the economy, we can discuss the impact on public services and housing, and we haven't done that enough. But fundamentally, this country is not a dormitory or a hotel. It is our home. We need to look after it. I want to rebuild the trust between the Conservative Party and the British people. I know we have a lot of work to do, but the first step is to accept that mistakes were made and to learn from them. As the new party leader, I want to acknowledge that we made mistakes. Yes, some of these problems are long-standing. This is a collective failure of political leaders from all parties over decades. But on behalf of the Conservative Party, it is right that I, as the new leader, accept responsibility and say truthfully, we got this wrong. I more than understand the public anger on this issue. I share it. The Conservatives will develop a detailed plan for immigration to put before the British public before the next election. They will have a clear choice: the policies of Labour, which are doomed to fail, or a new, coherent plan. It's time to tell the truth on immigration. And over the coming months, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you, Kemi, for that. Let me start by saying, as the new Shadow Home Secretary, that over decades, under successive governments, immigration has been far too high. Since 2010, net migration added 3.7 million people to our population. That is more than the population of the whole of Wales. It is the equivalent of 8 cities the size of Liverpool. Annual net migration has recently exceeded 700,000, and gross arrival numbers reached 1.2 million. Immigration at this scale is not acceptable, and the public agrees. 64% think immigration is too high, just 6% think immigration is too low. And Professor Brian Bell, the chair of the Independent Migration Advisory Committee, described recent levels of immigration as, and I quote, unsustainable. Professor Bell is right. High immigration has placed huge strain on housing, with net migration creating demand for 120,000 new homes per year. Public services like healthcare, education and transport are under strain. But it matters for our society too. Because for a nation to succeed, we need to be united in our values and share a sense of national identity and culture. And the truth is, this is undermined when large-scale immigration occurs, especially without integration. Speaking honestly, I am troubled that over 1 million people in the UK, over 1 million people, can't speak English either well or at all. For some nationalities, adult workforce participation is at or below 50%, with even more stark differences for women. In some parts of London, over a third of the population is relatively newly arrived, and in one part of East London, 73% of school children do not speak English as a first language. Now, these are real issues caused by high immigration without integration. Now, you often hear people, including government bodies, saying that we need immigration for workers and for economic growth. But the truth is, the vast majority of recent arrivals did not come here to work. Only 15%, just 1 in 7, of non-EU visas in the last 5 years were issued primarily for work purposes. And even there, for every worker who arrived, on average they brought an extra dependent along with them. Huge numbers of visas were issued for study and for family, with only a minority of those ending up in work. And even for those who were in work, they were often earning very low wages. In 2022-23, around half of those who arrived on worker visa routes were earning barely more than the minimum wage. And 68% of migrants here working, 68%, earned less than median earnings. And this should concern us because recent OBR analysis showed that low-wage migrant workers are fiscally negative. That means they cost other taxpayers more than they contribute for every single year of their life. Now, of course, we should welcome limited numbers of high-skilled workers who contribute financially or who fill genuine skill gaps. Research scientists in financial services, in technology, medicine, engineering, we like engineers, and in advanced manufacturing. This can work for us. But mass low-skilled migration actually reduces productivity and makes public finances worse. So, rather than businesses reaching for large numbers of cheap migrant workers to fill low-skilled vacancies, we want those businesses instead to invest more in cutting-edge labour-saving technology and mechanisation. And our competitor economies, places like Australia, like South Korea and Singapore, are doing this already in sectors from agriculture to construction to healthcare, and we in the UK can do the same. Now, it's also very relevant that over 9 million adults are economically inactive. That is an increase of around 10%, an increase of 850,000 since the pandemic. So businesses urgently need to recruit those people back into the workforce instead of importing low-wage migrant workers. And the government needs to make sure those people have the right skills and that the benefit system is toughened up to incentivise work. Now, as Kemi said, there is one thing we know for sure in all this. We can't trust Labour on immigration. They have already suspended the last Conservative government's measures to further tighten up the rules around legal migration that had been due to come into force in April of next year. Almost as soon as they were elected, they cancelled the Rwanda deterrent before it had even started, leading to a 23% increase in small boat crossings since the election, compared to the same time last year. And in opposition, Labour voted 134 times against measures to toughen up on illegal migration, including voting against tougher prison sentences for the people smuggling gangs they claim to want to smash. And Labour MPs and ministers now seem reluctant to talk much about immigration at all. The truth is, they don't have the answers. Now, by contrast, Conservatives in government did take some steps to reduce net migration, and as Kemi said, we may see the early effects of that in tomorrow's figures. But it is also true that we need to go much further and take tougher measures, as Kemi set out a few minutes ago. And those tougher measures will include a hard cap on numbers and zero tolerance for illegal migration. So with a new leader, the Conservatives will develop a new approach. We will now take the time needed to develop a carefully thought-through plan that we know will work. It'll be a plan that will deliver what the British people are asking for. OK, I think next we have Chris Hope from GBNews.
Thank you, Chris Hope. Kemi Badenoch, you said there you got it wrong on immigration. Chris Phillips said we can't trust Labour on immigration. But why on earth should voters trust either of you two or your entire party for completely copying up controlling net migration for the past 14 years? Why would you say today, for example, that the firm cap will be fewer than 100,000 arrivals a year?
So we're not setting out numbers because you've got to build that in to a full plan. What we have set out today is a framework for how we're going to be carrying out our immigration policy and how we are going to be holding Labour to account. It's not good enough just to complain about what they're doing. We have to explain why it is the wrong way of going about things. But you asked, why should people trust us? To earn back trust, you need to acknowledge where you got things wrong. And we are acknowledging today that while we may have tried, we did not deliver. We brought in a points-based system, which I personally thought was going to only allow skilled migrants in, and instead it allowed a lot of people at low incomes and with dependents. So we are going to change that. But we want people to know that we recognise their frustration, and in many cases, certainly in mine, we share it. Thank you.